Don't freak out, but it's midway through the year. Happy Friday! Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma and this is the mid-year freakout tag. This is one of BookTube's favourite tags. It was originally created by Ellie and Chami. I will link to both of their channels below. I haven't done this one in a while. So I did it my first year on BookTube, 2016. I did it 2017, I did it 2018, and then I just stopped. I didn't do it 2019 or 2020. And I wasn't even thinking of doing it this year, except I didn't realise quite how beloved this tag is until this year. I saw so many people putting on Twitter that they were just waiting to watch everyone's mid-year freakout tags. Like, apparently it's just everyone's favourite. So then I decided that I had to go down a rabbit hole of watching them, and I realised I agree. It is just a really nice, happy, exciting tag about everyone freaking out about the best books of the year so far. So I'm gonna do it. So my mid-year book freakout begins with question 1. What is the best book you've read so far this year? And I can just never narrow this down to just one. At this stage in the year, I've read a lot of books that I've really loved. So I've narrowed it down to 4. These 4 here are my favourite books of the year so far. The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans, Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, and 3 Hours by Rosamund Lupton. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about this one for my answer, because all 3 of these other books are going to reappear later on in the tag. There are other questions that apply best to these. So I'm going to crown 3 Hours the winner of my best book of 2021 so far, just for the sake of not repeating myself. But just know these are coming, and these were also fucking fantastic. So 3 Hours, you may have heard me raving about it already. I vlogged myself reading this one in a video I made where my mum controlled what I read, so I will link to that. It was really fun. Turns out the woman has good taste, and this book was fantastic. It is a literary thriller about a school shooting. So obviously that's a very, very stressful topic. It's over the course of 3 hours in this school. It's a school in England, which is, very, very rare for there to be school shootings. But it was so tense, it was so well written, it was so action-packed, but it was also this beautiful novel. It is very literary, and it is as much about the exciting plot, it's also about the message that this book is sending, and it did that so well. Rosamund Lupton achieved that so well. Because it's a school shooting set in England, and because that's incredibly rare, it seems at first like it's this kind of alternate reality where those kind of things happen here. It seems kind of beyond the stretch of reality, but then as the book goes on, you really realise that she is tying all of this to current events, to current problems that we have in our society that could lead to something like this happening. And it was really, really good. It was really, really good. It was incredibly stressful. There were loads of twists and turns. I actually gasped out loud. I whimpered at one point. I was so distressed. It really had me on the edge of my seat, but then it also just kept me thinking about it for so long and talking about it. Everyone I've recommended this book to, we just have not been able to shut up talking to each other about how amazing it was. So, well deserved. Rosamund, best book of 2021 so far. Join with some others. G&T break. The next question is kind of funny. So this one is, what's the best sequel that you've read so far this year? And I don't often read sequels. I don't often read series, and a lot of the books that I love don't tend to get sequels, so it's pretty rare. So I realised that I haven't read any sequels so far this year, except for right at the beginning of the year in January when I read the full... No, I didn't quite get to the end. I attempted to read the full Confessions of a Shopaholic series by Sophie Kinsella. I will link to that video. It involves me just slowly unravelling, hating each book more and more. I think my full unravelling actually came in the Balancing the Books, where I then talked about it, and I did not like those books. But considering that those books are the only ones that could possibly count as a sequel, I'm gonna have to answer this question with one of them. So, Shopaholic Abroad by Sophie Kinsella, which is number 2 in this series, was the best sequel that I read this year, and that is true. I did like this book. I loved the first book. I did like this book. I enjoyed the first 3, I think, even the first 3 or 4, and then they started going so rapidly downhill. So without being amazing, Shopaholic Abroad is the best sequel I read in 2021! Freak out! A new release that you haven't read yet but want to. I mean, I have tons. I have so many sitting on my TBR trolley that I need to read. But I'm going to say that my number one priority is Yours Cheerfully by AJ Pearce. Because if I'd read this one in time, hopefully I would have had an answer to the sequel question. This is a sequel. This is a sequel to Dear Mrs. Bird, which I have here. Dear Mrs. Bird by AJ Pearce. This is my proof copy of the sequel. This book was delightful. I gave it 5 stars. I'm hoping this one will be the same. G&T break. Most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I don't know if this is cheating to count one that I do already have. I have a proof copy of The Ophelia Girls by Jane Healey, but it comes out in July, I think, or in August. So it comes out like any minute now. But that is the second half of the year. And I just think it looks great. It's set between the 70s and the 90s. And it's about like a group of friends who are obsessed with each other. And they like recreate pre-Raphaelite paintings. It just looks very dreamy. And also I think I've talked about this one before because I pointed out how this is the UK cover and then this is the American cover. And they're so different that it's like, what book could have both of those covers? Because both of those vibes look really fun. So yeah, this is my most anticipated book on my trolley that's coming out in the second half of next year. The book that was my biggest disappointment, sadly, was Hostage by Clare Mackintosh. I don't have it anymore because I finished my proof and so I passed it on to a colleague. I really love Clare Mackintosh's thrillers. So I read 4 of her books in total now. The first 2 that I read, which were also the first 2 that she wrote, were incredible. I gave them both 5 stars, like absolutely fantastic. Then I read a thriller of hers that I didn't like quite so much. It was fine, but I gave it like a 3. Then she wrote a book that wasn't a thriller, and again, that one wasn't quite for me. But this book, Hostage, is set all in one plane ride. It sounded like so my kind of thing, so tense, so claustrophobic, so I was really, really excited for it. I was convinced it was going to be like a return to the 5-star Clare Mackintoshes, and it wasn't. So that was my biggest disappointment. It wasn't by any means the worst book I've read this year. It was absolutely fine. I gave it a 3 stars, but I actually, I flew through it. I really enjoyed reading it. So it was absolutely like, no way was it not a good book. Definitely not the worst book I've read. I've read some terrible books this year. But it wasn't the biggest disappointment for me because I really thought it was going to be 5 stars, For the biggest surprise, I'm going to say Pine, because I heard so many negative reviews of this. So this is Pine by Francine Toon. It's a pretty strange book. It doesn't have that much of a plot. It's just like a girl called Lauren who lives in Scotland with her father, and her mother went missing many years before, and she's like kind of seeing this ghost, and like it's just very much vibes with a tiny bit of plot at the end. Like suddenly all this stuff gets wrapped up at the end, so that was satisfying. A lot of people said this was so boring, including my sister hated it, lots of you hated it, like negative reviews from everyone that I know. So I kind of read this expecting it to be not fun. Like I actually read this one in a video. It was a word associations game that I will link to, and Leanne, of course, because Leanne and I hate each other, specifically wanted me to have a bad time reading the prompt that she gave me. So I deliberately picked this one out because I was like, this one's probably going to be a bad time. And then it surprised me because I loved it. I think I gave it a 4, but I was like really leaning towards maybe it's a 5. It was really good. It was really good and vibey and spooky and weird. Okay, the next question is your new favourite author. So either a debut author or someone who is new to you. And again, I struggled with this one because I realised that other than Sophie Kinsella, I don't think I have read 2 books by the same author this year. So I haven't like discovered a new author and then found that I like more than one of their books. So I'm going to go with an author that I've only read 1 book from, but I just feel very strongly that they're going to be a new favourite author. And this is where the next of my joint favourite books of the year comes in. So this is The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans, and this is a short story collection. I have a very mixed relationship with short story collections. Often I hate them because it's just like the worst part of reading a book is starting the book. It's just that on repeat until everyone dies. So, I'm not always convinced, but when they're good, they're really, really good. And these were really, really good. So I guess I kind of got a sense of Danielle Evans as an author in here because the stories are all different, so I got to see her writing different characters, and I knew that her writing was really, really engaging and really, really up my alley in every single story. And also the fact that she was able to get me engaged in short stories, like right from the beginning. I feel like I would read anything that this woman writes. She and I are just on the same writing, reading wavelength. So I'm going to say that Danielle Evans is my new favourite author of 2021, and I can't wait to see what comes next. Then, newest fictional crush. And I don't really crush on people in books anymore. Like, the last time I remember genuinely having a crush on someone in a book was when I read Twilight when I was, like, a teenager. I genuinely was crushing on Jacob. And not just the movie Jacob, the book Jacob. But other than that, I think it's really rare because I don't tend to visualise people that much in my head when I'm reading them. So I don't really know if I fancy them or not. And I also don't tend to read very much romance. So I'm not reading these like very romanticised, sexualised characters. So I don't know if I particularly have a newest fictional crush. I definitely have a crush on Willem in A Little Life, which I did read this year, but it was a reread, so it's not a new fictional crush. I think I even gave that as my answer when I did the mid-year freakout tag the year that I read that book. I might have said Jude too. In my head, Jude, also stunning. So the answer I'm going with is In the Shadow of the Wind, which is a book I just read and like thought it was fine. It's like a historical fiction, mystery, it's kind of about books, people love it, I thought it was fine. There is a character who's not even a main character. She's called Clara. Is she called Clara? Probably. She's only really in it at the beginning. But because the main character fancies her quite so much and describes her in like so much detail, he's just like so into her. I felt like I just pictured her as like more beautiful than anyone has ever existed in the world. I wouldn't say I really had a crush on her because, as I said, that's just not really how I engage with books these days, which sounds so boring. I should start reading more like sexy books because I enjoyed crushing on fictional characters. But I did definitely picture Clara as like smoking. For my newest favourite character, I'm going to the third of my joint best books of the year. This is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. It is about a butler who works in this like grand, posh English house, and it's all kind of just set on this day, on this weekend, when he goes off for a little trip. And there's a lot of flashbacks. It's just really him thinking about his life as a butler and how much it means to him, and then also reflecting on the paths that he didn't take in his life. And he was such a brilliantly written character. He's not my favourite in terms of being like someone I'd be pals with, because I wouldn't. I think he'd be incredibly boring. But I felt like he was brought to life for me like 110% by Ishiguro in this book. And I loved him, and I wanted to give him a hug and tell him everything was going to be okay. It was a pretty sad book. It was quite bleak towards the end, with like glimmers of hope. He's also kind of an absurd character, which helps. He's just like a little bit ridiculous. For a book that made you cry, I have two answers. So I reread A Little Life this year, and obviously that made me cry a lot. I did a reading vlog of it. I will link to that below. Everyone's been doing these like filming themselves crying at A Little Life videos. So I was determined that I wasn't going to do that. I was like, I'm just going to film myself reading it and telling people everything that happens in it. So people who don't want to read it can just like get all the spoilers without having to read it. I'm just going to be like straight-faced, telling them the full synopsis. That's not what happened. I sobbed my brains out. But the other answer is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, which is my fourth and final of the best books of the year for 2021. This was fantastic. So this is a multi-generational story about a family, a Korean family who moved to Japan. It's set during like a period of history that I didn't know very much about in terms of Korea in Japan. So like the Japanese annexation of Korea wasn't something that I was taught in history. So it was like I had to do quite a lot of learning to understand it, but it was absolutely beautiful. I love slow moving books like this. It was so sad. Like the sad things just kept happening. Nothing went right for these characters ever. It was just awful. And we go through the generations, and our main character is like the matriarch of the family who's called Sunja, and you just like want her to be happy, and everything just keeps falling apart for her. Oh my goodness. It's such a good book. It's so beautiful. I read it like slowly over a long period and I just wanted to savor it, and it was fantastic. I've been recommending it to everyone and no one is taking my recommendation because no one wants to cry this much. For a book that made me happy, I've said A Lady and Her Husband by Amber Reeves. A lot of my Persephone classics make me happy when I read them because there's something really fun about reading books that were written a long time ago, but that share a lot of your values today. Like, that's just very exciting. You could spin it as depressing that the world still hasn't improved, even though they knew it was bad back then. But I feel this kind of connection with people from the past. So Amber Reeves is this just badass woman and I loved her. And this book, A Lady and Her Husband, is about a sweet, gentle, middle-aged married woman whose youngest daughter has just got engaged and she's like, what am I gonna do with my time now? All of my children are gone. And her husband, who's like nice but like very condescending, is like, oh, little lady, come work for my business. He owns this like big chain of tea rooms. He's like, you can talk to the waitresses and find out what shoes they want. Like, he thinks that she'll just like busy herself. And actually what happens is she becomes like a full-blown socialist and she's like, they're not being paid enough. And it was so good and I loved it. And she's like, I'm gonna disrupt this shit. And I read it all in one go, and halfway through I literally like put it down and was like, this is so fun. And then went back to it. It made me really happy. G&T break. Question 12 is, what is the most beautiful book that you've got this year? And I've got two answers here. The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex and Blackwater's Sister by Zen Cho. Both of these cover designs are so great. I read this one. I haven't read this one. This one is like next on my list. It looks really fun. It's fantasy and I don't usually read fantasy, but it's been described as like a good way into fantasy and it just sounds so fun. It's got a lesbian main character who is hearing her grandmother's ghost's voice in her head and she has to go on this mission, and like, I'm just into it. The Lamplighters is a spooky mystery about three men who go missing from a lighthouse in Cornwall and no one knows where they went. It's based on a real story, but then she makes up her own version of it and it's just absolutely gorgeous. Anything with foil is, you know, always going to win my heart. But the colours, the pattern, like marble effect, I just think this is the most beautiful book ever. G&T break. And finally, the 13th question is, what book do you need to read before the end of the year? And the answer is all of them. I have a lot of books I want to read, but I did take a quick look at my TBR trolley to see if there was one that stood out in particular, and I decided that Patsy by Nicole Dennis-Benn is one that I definitely want to read this year. It hasn't been on my TBR for that long. I got it basically exactly a year ago, just over a year ago, so it's not like it's been waiting for forever, but it's one that I was really, really excited about at the time that I got it, so I need to hurry up. So I'm going to make sure that I read this one this year. You can hold me to that. I hope I remember to do that. So there you go, that was the mid-year book freakout tag. You guys are right, that's a really fun tag. I really enjoyed that. If you've done this tag, let me know in the comments and I'll go over and watch yours and freak out over books with you. But until then, I will see you guys next Friday. Goodbye forever. Until next Friday. I didn't mean to spin sideways, but I did and now I'm stuck.
Ran into you at the drugstore, you were picking up your prescription. It's funny 'cause